The 1970s was the worst decade for American cartoons, period. This isn't an opinion just shared by me, but by a lot of animation fans and animation historians. And it's pretty easy to see why. The theatrical short market being pretty much dead, the censorship and regulations leading to many series, even the original Super Friends barely having much action or anything that's even close to mild violence. See the 1975 Tom and Jerry show that was made by the same people who created them to see what I mean. To most of the animation on TV being very cheap and limited, the many celebrity-based shows, the spin-offs based off of an existing show, to the endless shows that really tried to copy Scooby Doo. We'll get to those later, but those shows pretty much show a huge reason why a lot of the cartoons that aired in the 70s were of really poor quality, both in writing and in animation. I mean, in the history of cartoons as animated shorts, what do the 70s even have? The 1900s and especially the 1910s were both the pioneering decades for the art form, so obviously they get a pass. The 1920s was when the medium was finally taken off, while still trying to find its footing. But it had a bunch of memorable and iconic shorts and characters such as Felix the Cat, Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, and especially Mickey Mouse. And those shorts are far more interesting and memorable than anything in the 70s. The 30s is when the golden age of animation would truly begin, and we would get a bunch of memorable and iconic shorts and characters, and a ton of technical innovations in animation would begin. The 40s? Well, that's a pure golden era in animation. Tons of iconic, memorable, and critically lauded shorts came out during that time. It's probably up there as the best for the whole medium. The 50s, while not being on the same level as excellence as the 40s, especially by the end, it was still a really good time and had a lot of experimental animation, especially from UPA. The 60s, while being a massive fall compared to the previous decades, especially with the decline of theatrical shorts due to the popularity of television and the popularity of animation being made for TV, at least there were still some shorts out there like the Pink Panther and the Tom and Jerry shorts made by Chuck Jones that had some creativity to it, among the dross like the later Looney Tunes and the Paramount Animation shorts. And the TV shows were at least more interesting, influential, creative, and more remembered than anything in the 70s, despite them being limited in their animation. The 80s, while generally being an era of blatant toy commercials or shows that were just based on a pre-existing IP, they at least had a bit more creativity and thought put into them, even though they didn't live up to their full potential. Though things really did improve towards the end of the decade, beginning with DuckTales, and would lead us into the Renaissance age of animation, where more creativity and thought were put into these shows than what came before. From the 90s till now, we've just had a bevy of classic animated shows that about 95% of it is better than your average 70s program. The 70s was just an absolute broken wreck, where almost every show had cheap animation, bland characters, bland stories, lame comedy, and Scooby Doo rip-offs. Speaking of which, wow, did Hanna-Barbera create a lot of Scooby Doo clones in the 70s. I get that Scooby Doo was a big success and networks wanted the slice of a pie, but to be honest, a lot of these shows just absolutely ripped off Scooby Doo verbatim. Well, almost. They didn't get everything from the Scooby Doo formula, but still, they just almost just practically ripped off the same plot beats and formula over and over and over again. These shows include such classics like Josie and the Pussycats, The Funky Phantom, The Amazing Chan and the Chan Clan, Speed Buggy, Goober and the Ghost Chasers, Inside Private Eye, Butch Cassidy, Clue Club, Jabberjaw, Captain Caban and the Teen Angels, The Buford Files, The Galloping Ghost, The New Shmoo, and Fangface. Okay, the last one was actually made by Ruby Spears, but you get what I mean. These shows used the same formula over and over again to a point where it was all tired and boring. Once you've seen them once, you've seen them all. And it's basically the same show with a gimmick attached to it, such as a ghost from the past, the characters being in a band, a caveman, a dog that can turn invisible, a small detective, etc., etc. These gimmicks just can't hide away that it's basically just Scooby Doo again. I mean, it's not like these stories were really that interesting to begin with. I mean, even in the original Scooby Doo, a lot of these stories were not really the greatest, to be honest. These clones would be more interesting had they not had the typical Scooby-Doo formula holding them back. Yeah, these shows wouldn't be great considering that this is the 70s, but they would at least have a smidge more originality and would be at least a tad more interesting than being just dull. Also, the characters in these shows, aside from some of the main ones and a few ones here or there, they either have no character or are just a rehash of another character from Hanna-Barbera's library. These shows are so devoid of creativity. It's the definition of soulless. There's almost nothing to gain from these shows. Like, almost nothing. I'd honestly rather watch 2 hours of Johnny Test compared to watching an episode of any of these shows. And I'm talking about the latest seasons of the show because, one, at least I can gain a bit of something out of it. Two, at least the characters actually have character and aren't completely boring tools to move the plot along. And three, the episodes don't really drag or aren't completely boring compared to any of these shows. It just shows how creatively bankrupt and dead the cartoon space was during the 70s. It was just an era where a lot of restrictions held back creativity, writing, and animation. It was just an ugly time to be an animation fan or to be working in the animation industry, as there was barely anything interesting, new, and exciting to look forward to. Anyone who thinks today or the last 15 years is worse than anything that happened during the 70s and even most of the 80s just doesn't know a lot about animation history. Not to say every 70s animation show was bad, but there were more inferior / weak / pointless animation fare compared to any other decade. The 70s were just a never-ending cartoon misery.
Everywhere you look, there's a heart, a hand to hold on to. Everywhere you look, there's a face of somebody who needs you. Everywhere you look, when you're lost out there and you're all alone, life is waiting to carry you home. Everywhere you look, everywhere you look,